how would you describe Rada technical training?
Technical training generally,
Yes.
yeah? It's predicated on the idea that you learn by doing. So you give students information, knowledge, you talk about equipment, you talk about methods, you talk about techniques, and then you get them to practice those techniques in as real a situation as possible. And very close to the training, students begin to work on productions at Rada, which are going in front of a public audience. So when I took over this role, that was the principle that was already there. What I've tried to do initially was to make sure that became more firmed up or more embedded. So as a consequence of some changes I made at that point, more than had been the case, that you learn and then you do. So all the students in their first year will learn a subject and then they'll be in that role very early on in their career. Within 6 weeks, you're in a role in a public performance here, in a technical role. So the first year come in and are divided into 6 different groups. They go to 6 different areas. They learn, for instance, some lighting equipment, lighting techniques, rigging techniques, and then within that 6 weeks period, they then become operators and riggers and focusers within the lighting department, and that's 1/6 of the year. And then subsequently, that group will go on to other subjects, and other groups will come around to lighting. So we call that rotation. They go around about 8 different subjects during the year.
And what are the goals of Rada in technical training?
Rada hasn't always taught technical training. It started as an acting school, but for half its life now, over 50 years, it's been teaching technical training because it realised that there was a need for a formal training, a proper training in those areas. And Rada's aim now is to provide the next generation of the best technicians at all levels in the industry, including the people right at the top and the people all through different areas of the industry. There are a number of places who do this, a number of drama schools that do this, not just Rada, but Rada is amongst the best, if not the best. It's thought of very highly, and our ambition is that we provide the best technicians, designers, stage managers, whatever you want to call them, into the industry in all kind of technical areas. And we've expanded to include every area you can think of, really, and in fact almost too expanded, and we've contracted slightly recently in order to make sure the quality is maintained. But the idea is that we provide skilled technicians, creative technicians.
Do you think very specific training in technical department justifies the role of Rada in student teaching?
It's a 2-year training, not a 3-year training. People can go on and do a 3rd year, but the 2-year training is the core training, and that 2-year training creates people who are both broad and narrow, in the sense that we teach students to understand all the components that go into a production. Their first year is very much about doing a bit of everything to a reasonably good level and performing in those roles as operator or dresser or whatever the role might be. And then in their 2nd year they specialise. So in their 2nd year they concentrate on the thing that they want to be in the industry. And in this country, people specialise as stage managers, as you've said, or as lighting technicians, production technicians, and even within an area, people specialise as a particular kind of stage manager or particular kind of lighting person. You can be a lighting designer or programmer or production electrician, for example. So that 2nd year of training, and those people who decide to do a further year, is about becoming very good at that particular part of the industry. But the underlying concept is that they also know how everything else goes together.
And do your students cross over to other technical fields later in their career?
The idea of the training also is that it provides a really good base for a life, for a career. It's broad in terms of technical knowledge, but also increasingly we're trying to make it very clear to the student that what they leave here with are good skills in communication, good skills in teamwork, in working in a collegiate environment, good skills in putting complicated things together effectively and clearly and efficiently and economically, and those skills transfer into all sorts of other things. So students leave Rada, perhaps sometimes they stay in theatre for their whole careers, but sometimes they'll do 10 or 15 years and then they'll transfer and they'll find their skills are very transferable. Education is an obvious place that they'll go into afterwards, but I've had students who've gone into all sorts of different bits of business, some connected to theatre, some not, and the skills they're using are the skills they've learnt here and built from. And increasingly, we're joining them together. One of the things I've always liked about the NSD, and I've loved learning about the NSD, is how you start with all your students together in their first year. Our students start either technical or acting straight away. What we're now doing is joining them up all the way through the course so that they come together and do projects more often, not in their departments as actor and technician, but as just makers of something. And that we ask them to forget what they are, so not label themselves as actor or technician, but just contribute together. And we end up with some of our technicians performing, some of our actors end up doing the technical work, whatever their skills are really. And those are important things to us, and we're continually developing those at the moment.
And apart from live production at London Theatre, is there an alternative theatre circuit as well? Is it flourishing or just surviving?
There is an alternative theatre world apart from the big West End and moneyed commercial theatre. There's a big fringe world, particularly in London. Is it surviving? Is it flourishing? It is flourishing because it's enormous and there's always more and more of it, and there's so much work going on out there. It's partly surviving because it's never had a lot of money behind it. But there are theatres above pubs and theatres in small spaces and theatres that break out all sorts of places that have been there for years and years and years, that have survived and done work. And sometimes it's grown into something bigger and sometimes it's not. But there is a flourishing fringe theatre world all over the country.
Are your technical students made to work in a different work environment outside Rada facility?
Yes. The idea of teaching the students is we equip them to be able to cope with all sorts of situations and all sorts of environments, not just lavish ones that have money. We try and provide good equipment, but we also try and provide them circumstances that test them. So we have three main theatres that we use. Our Vanbrugh Theatre and our GBS Theatre, the two larger theatres, run as a rep theatre in some ways, with the kind of budget, the kind of money that you'd expect, and occasionally slightly more lavish than that, because we also want to deal with digital technology or automation or something that's expensive. But our smallest theatre, the Gielgud Theatre, is deliberately kept an impoverished budget, so that the students have to be inventive and creative, and we call it, for want of a shorthand term, we call it a fringe venue. It doesn't really work as a fringe venue, but the money side, the facilities that they have are limited in there deliberately, so that people have to think how they would work in those kind of situations. And in fact, that derived from a student leaving here and working in a fringe theatre and coming back a few months after graduating and saying, oh, I didn't realise how good I had it at Rada. Now I have to struggle for everything I want. I can't find the colour for my lanterns, I can't find the equipment because it's not in my theatre. We don't have the money. And I realised that actually we should try and make sure people could survive that by providing a little experience of that here.
In NSD, even the technicians are storytellers.
Yeah.
And here we see that they are more perfected in the art of perfecting their particular trade and the thing they are doing. So would you rather start teaching them as storyteller?
Well, I think that's, I mean, yes, you've defined the Rada part of it. I'm definitely true that my delight in discovering that NSD students are great storytellers, and that because of the way you train them, they all use their minds imaginatively to create theatre, to tell stories. You've said that my students are better specialists. That's your opinion, but I mean that's what we're focusing on. I think what I've said before about putting the groups together, the actors, the technician, the people doing the MA course here, by putting them together in groups and tasking them with problems, we are also trying to make them think creatively and imaginatively. But we've got a way to go with that. We haven't got the whole first year that you have, where you give people projects and they're all together. So we haven't got that foundation that your students have at the NSD, but we're trying to filter in some of that concept. On the very first day when students arrive, the director of the academy sits on stage, and I'm on one side as director of technical training, and Lucy, the head of acting, director of acting, is on the other side. So us three, representing everything we do, sit on stage and talk to the students. And the one thing that the director says very clearly at the beginning is that everybody in front of him is an artist, is a creative being, and that while they'll have their specialisms, they mustn't forget that. Now I can see when I look across the students that people have come in to learn stage carpentry or prop making, whatever it might be, costume making, don't necessarily think of themselves as artists, as creative artists. I could see the faces going, oh, he's talking to the actors. He isn't talking to the actors. He's talking to everybody deliberately. We have to work a bit at that to make them realize, they've got that potential.
And this acting part of it, when Rada is known for its acting school and its way of teaching things, and which is as good in practice and in theoretical level. But in your technical teaching courses, are theory that important? Theoretical knowledge that important?
Yes, I mean the theory behind why you're doing what you're doing, the theory behind a lighting design, the theory behind anything technical that you're doing or creative is important. We teach the students theatre history so they understand why we do things the way we do things now is based on, what started in ancient Greece and how things have been added from all sorts of other influences ever since. The modern world, particularly the last 100, 150 years, the way that the whole psychology of humanity changed, theatre changed with it, or theatre affected humans, depending on how you look at it. That is part of the teaching. There's a limit to how many things of those things we can put in. Students recently said to me, we'd love you to do a brief history of classical music. I'd love to do that for them, but it's where do I fit that in? So it's tricky, but yes, we are very keen that the students understand their place politically, socially, historically, and the theories behind what they do is part of that.
Are your students inclined to do this alternative small independent theatre, or they are more inclined to join this large London productions?
It depends on the individual, I think. A lot of them want to do big, exciting work, and they see the West End and musicals and big theatre as being big and exciting, especially those students who are interested in new technology, and that's where the money is to use new technology. So a lot of them do think in terms of big productions, but not all of them. And some of them realise the pleasure in being in a small company and working intently on something that they can craft and have much more control over than they would in a big company. So some students come to us from all around the country and all around the world and then go back to where they came from to run their local theatre, which I think is something NSD does as well, but it's a different world in India. But it isn't unusual here as well. I think also students leave here and they start working. They need to earn a living, of course. And they won't necessarily choose where they start. They'll choose whatever job happens to be available in their area, they will take. Once you're earning, you can then think, right, where do I go next? And I think that's not always, haven't always got that luxury straight out of Rada, because they need to start paying back their debt, they need to start learning a living. I think the bigger your reputation gets, the more choice you have.
And when it comes to lighting, the trend and with such big industry, or should I say such a big theatre scene in London around, and this is a hub of theatre in all around world. So there must be thousands, hundreds of trends in lighting that keeps going on. So how do you equip your student to work in almost every trend?
We give our students a really good basic understanding of what it is to be efficient and effective and creative and useful, really, so that every student in lighting, for example, should leave here able to be a production electrician, able to support any size of company putting in a lighting rig and making that rig work to a designer's brief. Some of those students want to be lighting designers as well. Some of the students want to be programmers. Some of them want to be, have a specific kind of role. But we make sure that they have a really profoundly good understanding of all the nuts and bolts that go together, so that they can be useful, whatever they're called upon to do, as well as specialising in a particular subject. So if they want to be a programmer, that's fine. If they want to be a lighting designer, that's fine. They won't necessarily leave Rada and only get that kind of work. They need to be able to turn up at a theatre and help in the lighting area. And they're more likely to continue to get work as a part of a crew, a lighting crew initially, whilst they're also pursuing their specialist area. So everybody in every area of training has to be good at when I say the basics, I don't mean the simple things. I mean everything that underpins an area. So there's no good being particularly good at making a particular kind of prop or a particular kind of costume. That's too narrow. You've got to be able to do all the basic skills, make all the basic things, and then you can begin to specialize.
All the higher seat of learning in the world, bigger universities like Oxford, Cambridge, and others, are more known for their research work. In the same way, Rada is a very leading theatre training institute. So, what kind of research do you do?
That's a good question. We are a vocational training academy, so our focus has not been on research. It's been on training people for the profession to work practically. We're very aware that our research is not at the same level as Oxford or Cambridge. So it's something we need to figure. But there's an economy within this company as there isn't any other company, and we're almost too busy doing what we do well, which is train people, to stop. We don't have a habit of giving people sabbaticals and supporting them while they research. And unlike a university, it's not written into our contracts that a certain amount of our time should be in research. Myself, I've written a lot during my life, books about theatre, about technical theatre, about lighting mostly. And for me, that's been my research, that's been my development, and that's kept my brain going, part of my brain going, that might not otherwise have been going. It's an area rather that's weak, and we need to look at, particularly because there's a lot of funding attached to research. Now, that's not to say no research happens in the building at the moment. There are people with interest, there are people writing books, there are people developing ideas, but it's only really in its infancy as something that's the core part of what we do. You need to talk to perhaps our dramaturg or our director of the academy about their ambitions for that in the future.
Apart from your training here, you have been to National School of Drama almost 5 or 6 times, and you have been teaching students there. So, what would you advise an NSD student, especially a lighting student, that they should do apart from let's do it and learn it? Is one absorbing the world. So what technical advice that you will give them?
I mean, I think part of the student exchange program at RADA and with the NSD is to show the technical students at the NSD what's available here as a comparison to what's available in Delhi or in India. That's not to say we're better or worse than Delhi, but it's different. And I think the joy of the exchange is just to, in both directions, is to open the mind up to alternatives and different ways of thinking. I don't know what I'd say to an NSD student. I mean, the work situation in India is very different. The way an NSD student progresses their professional development and their career is very different in India than it is here. And it's not easy even to advise my own students. You know, they get a job and they move forward through the industry. I understand how that works here much better than I do in India. But even then, it's a little whimsical in the sense that you build your reputation and you keep promoting yourself to a point where you begin to make the choices rather than having to just take the next job. I suppose that's what I'd say to any student, really, is be ambitious, be clear about what you want to do, continue to talk about that whilst doing other things. And by other things, I mean, you have to get that first job, you have to be employable, you have to be good at what you do. I know NSD students are particularly diverse and broad, so they go and often end up doing, I think, lighting and directing and sound and all sorts of things, which my students won't do. My students will follow a narrow path. But in both cases, it's right that the student continues to talk about what they are.
And in a country like India, which has 1.3 billion people, and resources are not as good as in Europe and London, the higher technical knowledge and large productions don't seem that much democratic. In India, we are trying to spread the theatre towards masses.
Yeah.
But when we see your approach in London, this is more technical, perfect theatre, which is very expensive. It seems exclusive instead of inclusive for a country like us, at least. So, do you have any comment on that?
There's nothing to stop somebody making a piece of theatre and just putting it on somewhere. We have our Rada Festival at the moment, which is about people just turning up and producing a bit of theatre. And in one of our theatres in the Gilgud, it's very simple stuff. There's no scenery, there's a bare floor. They come in and sometimes they bring a lot of stuff with them, and sometimes they don't. There are venues all around the city and all around this country that allow you to do that. So it's not that simple theatre doesn't exist. Peter Brook's poor theatre still exists in this country in some ways. But you're sitting near the West End, and the West End is, yes, a huge commercial vehicle where some things are done very expensively. But that's not all there is to theatre still in this country. We're in a difficult economic situation at the moment as a country. There's not a lot of extra money around. So that has made it perhaps more difficult for people to sponsor and look after the arts, but it's still there.
And what about your comment about India? Whether we should follow this Western large theatre kind of thing, where we are after the.
Oh, I see. I think it doesn't matter what I think really. It finds its own way. It's like water really. Water will run to find its own level, and the theatre you get is the theatre you want to some extent. I think there's a much higher respect in India for the beauty of the simple, of dance and drama that is about storytelling, that's about the physical actor in a space without the need of technology. I think that's great. I think we have that here as well. But sitting near the West End, there's also a huge explosion of commercial, big technical shows. And I think India has the potential to, especially from all its regional diversity, to produce some amazing combinations and interesting fusions in a very simple way, in a very beautiful way. And I think you're great storytellers. You must be one of the great storytelling nations of the world. Your history suggests that, your work suggests that. And I think you shouldn't lose that, and you shouldn't swamp it with technology. But I don't think an economy or a world of drama in a country should rely on those things. You have to develop your own things.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.